The hunger in Zara Lawson's eyes told a story before her lips could form the words, her trembling fingers gripping the golden band as she slid it across the bakery counter. The year was 1878, and Fort Sumner, New Mexico, had seen its share of desperate souls, but something about the young widow's quiet dignity made even the hardened baker pause. "Madam, I don't take jewelry for payment," the baker said, pushing the wedding ring back toward her with flour-dusted fingers. "I run a business, not a pawn shop." Zara swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. 6 days without a proper meal had left her light-headed, the world occasionally tilting beneath her feet. Her wedding ring, the last physical reminder of Thomas, was the only thing of value she had left. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the busy bakery. "Just one loaf, that's all I need." The baker's expression softened momentarily before hardening again. "I can't, madam. Try the pawn shop down the street." Zara's shoulders slumped as she carefully picked up the ring. The sweet aroma of fresh bread surrounded her, making her stomach clench painfully. She hadn't eaten anything but a handful of wild berries since yesterday morning. Turning away from the counter, she tucked the ring back into her pocket, knowing that by tomorrow she would likely have no choice but to part with it permanently. She didn't notice the tall man who had been standing behind her in line, watching the exchange with interest. She was halfway to the door when his deep voice stopped her. "Miss, wait." Zara turned, nearly colliding with the broad chest of a man dressed in worn riding clothes, a dusty cowboy hat tipped back on his head. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, but his eyes, an unusual shade of amber, were kind. "Quinn Zimmer," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Couldn't help but overhear. Seems to me a person offering their wedding ring for bread might be in need of more than just a loaf." Zara stiffened, pride flaring despite her desperate circumstances. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Zimmer." The corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Never suggested charity, madam, but I was headed to the hotel restaurant for supper, and I've always found meals taste better with company." He gestured toward the door. "Would you join me? Nothing improper about two strangers sharing a meal and conversation." Zara hesitated, studying him. He wasn't like most cowboys she'd encountered since arriving in Fort Sumner. There was no leering in his gaze, no hidden intentions in his invitation that she could detect. Still, she'd learned the hard way that men rarely offered something for nothing. "Why would you do that for someone you don't know?" she asked bluntly. Quinn Zimmer's expression remained open, honest. "Because my ma raised me to believe that how we treat folks when they're down tells more about our character than how we act when times are good." He glanced at her simple, travel-worn dress. "And if you don't mind me saying so, you look like you could use a proper meal." Her stomach growled loudly enough for both of them to hear, making the decision for her. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "I suppose I could join you," she said quietly. "Thank you. The pleasure's mine, Miss Lawson." "Zara Lawson," Quinn nodded, holding the door open for her as they stepped out into the dusty main street of Fort Sumner. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden boardwalks as they walked the short distance to the hotel restaurant. The Desert Rose Hotel wasn't the fanciest establishment Zara had ever seen, but it was clean and respectable. The dining room was half full with a mix of locals and travelers, the clink of silverware and murmur of conversation creating a pleasant backdrop. The hostess led them to a table by the window, and Zara was grateful when Quinn pulled out her chair before taking his own seat. Once they were settled with coffee steaming in front of them, Quinn removed his hat, revealing thick chestnut hair that curled slightly at the ends. Up close, Zara could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the mark of a man who spent his days in the sun. "Order whatever you'd like," he said, opening his menu. "The beef stew here is particularly good after a long day." Zara scanned the offerings, her mouth watering at the descriptions. She hadn't seen such variety in months. "I couldn't possibly, please," Quinn interrupted gently. "It would be my pleasure." A man gets tired of his own company on the trail. When the waitress arrived, Zara ordered the beef stew while Quinn chose the venison with potatoes. As the waitress departed, an awkward silence fell between them. Quinn broke it first. "So, Mrs. Lawson, miss," she corrected quickly, then faltered. "Well, I suppose it's Mrs. technically, but there's no Mr. Lawson anymore." Understanding flickered in Quinn's eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she murmured, her fingers automatically seeking the ring in her pocket. Quinn leaned back slightly, giving her space. "What brings you to Fort Sumner? It's not exactly on the main routes for most travelers." Zara took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "Necessity," she finally answered. "I was heading to Santa Fe, but—" She trailed off, unsure how much to share with this stranger. "But the journey proved more difficult than anticipated," Quinn suggested. She nodded, grateful for his perception. "Something like that." Their food arrived, steaming and aromatic. Zara had to force herself not to fall upon it like a starving animal. She took a small bite, closing her eyes briefly at the rich flavor. When she opened them again, she found Quinn watching her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Would you be willing to tell me your story, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked quietly. "I've found that burdens shared are often lightened." Zara considered his request while taking another spoonful of stew. Part of her wanted to maintain her privacy to guard what little she had left. But there was something about Quinn Zimmer that inspired trust, and she was too weary to maintain her defenses. "It's not a particularly happy tale," she warned. He smiled slightly. "Few true stories are, in my experience." Zara took a deep breath. "I was married to Thomas Lawson for just over 3 years. He was a good man, a carpenter by trade. We lived in Missouri, had a small house on the edge of town." Her voice softened with memory. "We were happy. We were going to start a family." She paused, steeling herself for the next part. "Then last winter there was an outbreak of influenza. Thomas caught it, and within a week—" She swallowed hard. "I nursed him day and night, but there was nothing to be done." Quinn's face showed genuine sympathy. "I'm truly sorry." "After he was gone, I discovered that Thomas had borrowed heavily to expand his workshop. The creditors took everything: the house, his tools, nearly all our possessions." Bitterness crept into her voice. "They even wanted to take my wedding ring, but I refused to give it up." "And now you're trying to trade it for bread," Quinn observed quietly. Zara's chin lifted slightly. "I had a plan. Thomas's cousin lives in Santa Fe. He offered me a place to stay until I could find work as a seamstress or perhaps a teacher. I used what little money I had left for the stagecoach fare, but there was a robbery 2 days from Fort Sumner." Quinn's eyebrows rose. "The garrison gang," she nodded. "The driver was killed. They took everything of value from the passengers. I managed to hide my wedding ring, but they got my money, my ticket, everything else." She took another spoonful of stew. "The remaining passengers were brought here to Fort Sumner. I've been trying to find work for the past week, but—" "Not much call for seamstresses in a place like this," Quinn finished for her. "Exactly. And I've discovered that a woman alone faces challenges." The memory of several unwelcome propositions made her cheeks burn with indignation. Quinn's expression darkened momentarily. "Yes, I imagine you would. I tried to send a letter to Thomas's cousin, but I have no way of knowing if it will reach him or when he might respond." Zara sighed. "So here I am, trying to trade my wedding ring for bread. And how far is it to Santa Fe from here?" "About 150 miles, I believe." Quinn whistled softly. That's quite a journey on foot. Hence the bread, Zara said with a wry smile, surprising herself with the flash of humor. Quinn's amber eyes crinkled as he returned her smile. Indeed. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Zara savoring every bite of the hearty stew. When she'd scraped the bowl clean, the waitress appeared with slices of apple pie for both of them. I didn't order, Zara began. On the house, the waitress said with a wink at Quinn. Mr. Zimmer's a regular when he's in town. We take care of our own. After the waitress left, Zara raised an eyebrow at her dining companion. You're well known here, Quinn shrugged modestly. I run cattle between here and Texas, stop in Fort Sumner a few times a year. He took a bite of pie. So what's your plan now, Mrs. Lawson? The question brought her crashing back to reality. The wonderful meal had temporarily allowed her to forget her dire circumstances. I'm not entirely sure, she admitted. Continue looking for work, I suppose. Or perhaps try to join another stagecoach heading west, if I can find someone willing to hire me for the journey. Quinn considered her for a long moment. I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Lawson. Zara stiffened immediately, her guard rising. Noticing her reaction, Quinn quickly added, a proper business proposition, I assure you. I'm heading to Santa Fe myself. I've got a small herd, about 40 head, that I'm driving up there to sell. It's just me and 2 hands, and we could use a camp cook. A camp cook, Zara repeated, surprised. Yes, madam. Nothing complicated. Coffee, beans, biscuits, maybe the occasional stew. We provide all the supplies. In exchange, you get safe passage to Santa Fe and wages for your time. Zara stared at him, searching for the catch. And that's all you expect? His expression remained earnest. That's all. You'd have your own tent, of course, and I give you my word as a gentleman that you'd be treated with respect. Why would you offer this to a stranger? Quinn took a sip of his coffee. I need a cook. You need to get to Santa Fe. Seems like a mutually beneficial arrangement to me. He paused. Besides, my regular cook broke his leg 2 towns back, and trail food prepared by me and my boys might just be considered a form of torture. Despite herself, Zara smiled. I see. Think about it, Quinn said, signaling for the check. We leave tomorrow at dawn. If you're interested, meet us at the livery stable at the east end of town. As they left the restaurant, the sun had almost completely set, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Quinn walked her to the modest boarding house where she'd been staying. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Zimmer, Zara said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. Quinn, please, Quinn, she amended. It was very kind of you. He tipped his hat to her. It was my pleasure, Mrs. Lawson. Zara, she offered in return. Zara, he repeated, his voice warming the name. Will I see you tomorrow morning? She hesitated, weighing her limited options. The proposition was risky, traveling alone with 3 men she didn't know across open country. Yet something about Quinn Zimmer made her believe his word when he promised her safety. And what real choice did she have? Yes, she decided, I believe you will. His smile lit up his face, making him look younger. I'm glad to hear it. Good night, Zara. Good night, Quinn. Zara watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the growing darkness. Inside her room, the cheapest the boarding house offered, she sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled out her wedding ring. The gold caught the dim lamplight, and she thought of Thomas. What would he think of her decision to travel with strangers? Would he understand the desperation that drove her? I'm doing what I must to survive, she whispered to his memory. I hope you can forgive me. She slipped the ring back into her pocket and began to pack her few belongings for the journey ahead. Morning came quickly, the eastern sky barely showing the first hints of dawn as Zara made her way to the livery stable. Her single carpet bag contained everything she now owned in the world: 2 dresses, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and a small daguerreotype of Thomas that she'd managed to save from the creditors. The smell of horses and hay greeted her as she approached the stable. Quinn was already there, checking the cinch on a handsome chestnut gelding. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps, his face breaking into a warm smile. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I said I would," Zara replied, shifting her carpet bag to her other hand. "So you did." Quinn gestured toward 2 men leading horses from the stable. "That's Elias and Jeremiah, my hands. Boys, this is Mrs. Lawson. She'll be joining us as camp cook to Santa Fe." The men tipped their hats politely. Elias was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a graying beard and weathered face. Jeremiah was younger, closer to Quinn's age, with a friendly smile and freckled complexion. "Madam," Elias acknowledged with a nod. "Hope you can make better coffee than the boss. His brew could strip paint." "It's not that bad," Quinn protested good-naturedly. "It surely is," Jeremiah chimed in, securing a pack horse to his saddle. "Almost killed that buyer from Kansas last month." Quinn shook his head, turning back to Zara. "Don't mind them. They exaggerate." He pointed to a sturdy-looking bay mare. "That's Penny. She'll be yours for the journey." Gentle as they come, but with enough spirit to keep up with the herd. Zara approached the mare cautiously. It had been years since she'd ridden regularly, though she'd grown up around horses on her father's small farm. "Hello, Penny," she murmured, stroking the horse's velvety nose. The mare nickered softly, nudging Zara's hand. "She likes you already," Quinn observed, coming to stand beside her with a saddle. "Let me help you get her ready." As he showed her how to properly saddle and bridle Penny, explaining each step, Zara found herself studying him in the growing light. His movements were efficient, his hands sure and gentle with the horse. There was an honest quality to him that she found reassuring. "Have you been driving cattle long?" she asked as he checked the stirrups for her. "Since I was 16, Quinn replied. "My father was a rancher in Texas. Taught me everything I know about cattle and horses." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "Lost him in '67. Raiders hit our ranch while I was driving a herd to market." "I'm sorry," Zara said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of loss in his expression. Quinn nodded his acknowledgement. "Been on my own since then. Built up a small spread near Amarillo, but I make most of my money buying cattle cheap in Texas and selling them up north where beef prices are higher." "And your mother?" Zara asked, remembering his earlier mention of her. "Passed when I was 12. Fever." He gave the saddle a final check. "There, you're all set. Need help mounting?" "I think I can manage," Zara said, gathering her skirts in one hand. She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up with more grace than she expected, settling into the saddle. "See, like riding a bicycle." Quinn looked up at her with amusement. "A what?" Zara laughed, realizing her mistake. "It's an expression my father used. He was originally from Boston. They have all sorts of strange sayings." By the time the sun had fully risen, they were on their way. The small herd of cattle moved at a steady pace ahead of them, guided by Elias and Jeremiah. Quinn rode alongside Zara at the rear, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of local history. The morning was pleasant, with a gentle breeze keeping the heat at bay. Zara found herself relaxing in the saddle, enjoying the rhythm of Penny's gait and the wide open spaces surrounding them. After months of grief and anxiety, there was something freeing about the journey, despite the uncertainty that awaited her in Santa Fe. "How long will it take us to reach Santa Fe?" she asked as they crossed a shallow stream. "About 10 days if the weather holds and we don't run into trouble," Quinn replied, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. We'll follow the Pecos River north for a while, then cut across to the Santa Fe Trail. And the cattle, they'll be sold in Santa Fe, Quinn nodded. I have a buyer lined up, rancher who's expanding his herd. Pays fair prices and doesn't try to cheat me, which is all a man can ask for in this business. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the lowing of cattle, the creak of saddle leather, and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats against the earth. Around midday, Quinn called a halt near a shady grove of cottonwoods beside the river. We'll rest here through the hottest part of the day, he announced. Give the cattle a chance to drink and graze a bit. Zara dismounted, wincing slightly as her muscles protested. It had been longer than she realized since she'd spent hours in the saddle. Quinn noticed her discomfort and offered a sympathetic smile. First day's always the hardest, he said, taking Penny's reins. You'll be saddle sore tonight, but it gets better. I'll manage, Zara assured him, stretching discreetly. While Quinn and the men tended to the cattle, Zara explored the chuck wagon that had been traveling ahead of them. It was well stocked with provisions: flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, dried apples, and various other staples. She set about preparing a simple midday meal, grateful for the familiar task that kept her hands busy. By the time the men had settled the herd, Zara had coffee brewing and beans warming over the fire she'd built. Quinn approached, removing his hat and wiping his brow with a bandana. That coffee smells like heaven, he said appreciatively. Let's hope it tastes better than paint stripper, Zara replied with a small smile, remembering Elias's comment. Quinn laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I'm never going to live that down, am I? Not if your men have anything to say about it. They ate quickly, eager to get back on the trail before the afternoon grew too hot. As Zara was cleaning up, Elias approached her with a nodded thanks for the meal. Boss says you're widowed, madam, he said, his gruff voice softened with sympathy. Yes, Zara confirmed, slightly surprised that Quinn had shared that detail. Elias nodded thoughtfully. Lost my wife 10 years back. Gets easier to bear, but the hole never quite fills up. He handed her his empty plate. Just wanted to say, if you need anything on this journey, you just say the word. My Molly would have wanted me to look out for a lady in your position. Touched by his unexpected kindness, Zara smiled warmly. Thank you, Mr. Elias. That means a great deal to me. As they resumed their journey, Zara found herself stealing glances at Quinn riding tall in his saddle, occasionally calling out instructions to his men or turning to check on her. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength combined with unexpected gentleness. She caught herself wondering what his story truly was, beyond the brief details he'd shared. The afternoon passed slowly, the landscape gradually changing as they moved north. By the time Quinn called a halt for the day, the sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky in brilliant hues. They made camp on a small rise near the river. The cattle settled in a natural depression nearby. Zara set to work preparing supper while the men established camp, her muscles protesting every movement after the long day in the saddle. Despite her discomfort, there was satisfaction in having a purpose again, in being useful. As darkness fell, they gathered around the campfire to eat the hearty stew Zara had prepared. The men's appreciative comments warmed her as much as the fire did. This is proper food, Jeremiah declared, helping himself to seconds. Begging your pardon, Mrs. Lawson, but I'd follow you to California and back if you promised to cook like this along the way. Zara laughed, the sound surprising her. When had she last laughed freely? I'll take that as a compliment, Mr. Jeremiah. Just Jeremiah, madam. Mr. was my father, and he was a mean old cuss I'd rather not be reminded of. After supper, Elias produced a harmonica and played a few melancholy tunes while they sipped coffee around the fire. The familiar songs tugged at Zara's heart, reminding her of evenings on her father's porch long ago. When Elias finally put the instrument away and headed to his bedroll, Jeremiah following shortly after, Zara found herself alone with Quinn by the dying fire. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice low in the quiet night. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Zara nodded but made no move to rise. The night was peaceful, the stars brilliant overhead in a way they never seemed to be in town. "It's beautiful out here," she murmured. "I'd almost forgotten." Quinn followed her gaze upward. "That it is. One of the reasons I could never settle for town life. Too many buildings blocking the view, too many people making noise." He glanced at her. "Your tent's all set up whenever you're ready. We'll be moving out at first light." Zara finally stood, her muscles screaming in protest. She couldn't quite suppress a wince. "Saddle sore?" Quinn asked sympathetically. "Is it that obvious?" "First day's always rough," he said, standing as well. "I have some liniment that might help if you'd like." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks at the impropriety of the suggestion, but Quinn quickly added, "For you to apply yourself, of course. It helps with the soreness." "Thank you," she said, accepting the small tin he retrieved from his saddlebag. "Good night, Quinn." "Good night, Zara. Sleep well." In the privacy of her small tent, Zara applied the liniment to her aching muscles, the sharp herbal smell filling the enclosed space. As she settled onto her bedroll, she found herself thinking of Quinn's kind eyes and the gentle way he'd offered help without making her feel like a burden. It had been a long time since anyone had shown her such consideration. She drifted off to sleep with the sound of the cattle lowing softly in the distance, and the memory of Quinn's smile warming her thoughts. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm up before dawn, on the trail by sunrise, stopping during the hottest part of the day before continuing until dusk. Zara's body adjusted to the saddle, her muscles no longer screaming in protest each morning. She took pride in her role as cook, even enjoying the challenge of creating satisfying meals with limited ingredients. On the 4th day, as they were breaking camp, Quinn approached her with a concerned expression. "Storm's coming," he said, nodding toward the northwest where dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. "Might be a bad one." Zara followed his gaze, noting the ominous wall of clouds. "How bad?" "Hard to say for sure, but those clouds don't bode well." He frowned. "We're still a day's ride from the next town. Best to push on and try to reach it before the worst hits." They traveled faster that day, the cattle sensing the change in the air and growing restless. By mid-afternoon, the wind had picked up considerably, and the temperature had dropped. The dark clouds now dominated half the sky, occasional flashes of lightning visible in the distance. "Quinn," Jeremiah called from ahead, pointing to a cluster of buildings barely visible through the gathering gloom. "Looks like a way station or trading post." Quinn rode up beside Zara. "Change of plans. We'll shelter there until the storm passes. No sense risking the herd in open country with lightning about." They reached the small outpost just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. It consisted of a trading post, a small stable, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. A weathered sign proclaimed it Thompson's Trading Post ESD, 1865. An older man emerged from the main building as they approached, squinting at their party. "Got a storm coming," he called unnecessarily. "You folks looking for shelter?" "If you've got room," Quinn replied, dismounting. "Got 40 head of cattle that need penning, too." The man, presumably Thompson, nodded. "Corral around back should hold 'em. 5 cents a head for the cattle, 2 bits each for you folks to use the bunkhouse." Quinn agreed to the terms, and they quickly set about getting the cattle secured and the horses stabled. By the time they'd unloaded their essential supplies, the rain was coming down in sheets, driven sideways by the howling wind. The trading post's main room was dimly lit by oil lamps, the walls lined with shelves of basic supplies. A pot-bellied stove in the center provided warmth, and a few rough tables and chairs were scattered about. Thompson's wife, a thin woman with kind eyes, offered to help Zara prepare a meal using their stove. "Been a while since we had a woman's company out here," she confided as they worked together. "Just me and Thompson most of the year, 'cept when traders or travelers pass through." "How long have you been here?" Zara asked, kneading dough for biscuits. "Going on 13 years now," Mrs. Thompson replied. "Thompson worked for the stage company before that, but his leg got busted up in an accident. Company gave us this outpost as a kind of pension." She glanced at Zara's plain dress and the wedding ring she now wore on her finger again. "You traveling with those men long?" "No," Zara explained about her arrangement with Quinn. "He's been very kind." Mrs. Thompson studied her thoughtfully. "Mr. Zimmer's got a good reputation on the trail. Fair businessman, treats his hands well." She lowered her voice. "Handsome man, too, if you don't mind me saying so." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I hadn't really noticed." The older woman's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a moment, but she changed the subject graciously. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling overhead. After they had eaten, Thompson brought out a deck of cards, and the men engaged in a friendly poker game while Zara helped Mrs. Thompson with mending. The homely task and the older woman's cheerful chatter were comforting, reminding Zara of quieter times. Later, as the storm began to subside, Zara stepped onto the covered porch for a breath of fresh air. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, and the air smelled clean and earthy. She leaned against a post, watching the last of the lightning illuminate the distant horizon. The door opened behind her and Quinn stepped out, 2 steaming cups in his hands. "Thought you might like some coffee," he said, offering her one. "Thank you." Zara accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth seeping into her fingers. Quinn leaned against the porch railing, his profile illuminated by the soft light spilling from the windows. "Mrs. Thompson says the storm should clear by morning. We can be on our way after sunrise." Zara nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "She's a kind woman. Been out here nearly as long as Fort Sumner's been a town," Quinn remarked. "Takes a special kind of strength to live in such isolation." "Yes," Zara agreed, thinking of her own situation. "Though sometimes isolation finds you even when you're surrounded by people." Quinn glanced at her, understanding in his eyes. "After Thomas died, you mean?" She nodded. "Grief has a way of building walls even when you don't intend them." They stood in companionable silence for a while, listening to the diminishing rain. Finally, Quinn spoke again, his voice quiet. "Can I ask you something, Zara?" "Of course." "What will you do in Santa Fe if your husband's cousin isn't there or can't help you?" The question had been weighing on her mind as well. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Find work, I suppose. I'm a decent seamstress. Or perhaps try to secure a position as a teacher or governess." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "Santa Fe's growing fast. Lots of opportunities for someone willing to work hard. That's my hope." Zara turned to face him. "And you, after you sell your cattle, back to Amarillo for a spell. Got a small place there, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Then probably another drive in a few months." He ran a hand through his hair. "It's not much of a life, always on the move." "But you enjoy it," Zara observed. A small smile played at his lips. "Most days. Though lately I've been thinking it might be nice to spend more time at the ranch, maybe build it up some." His eyes met hers briefly before looking back out at the rain. Gets lonely on the trail sometimes. The admission hung in the air between them, intimate in its honesty. Zara found herself studying his profile, noting the strong line of his jaw, the slight curl of his hair at the nape of his neck. There was something undeniably attractive about him, but it wasn't just his physical appearance, it was his quiet strength, his consideration, the way he treated her with respect without making her feel fragile. "We should get some rest," Quinn said finally, straightening. "Tomorrow's another long day." "Yes," Zara agreed, reluctant to end the moment but knowing he was right. "Thank you for the coffee and the company." As she followed him back inside, Zara realized with a small jolt of surprise that for the first time in months she was looking forward to tomorrow. The storm had cleared by morning, leaving behind a washed clean world that sparkled in the early sunlight. They set out after a hearty breakfast, the cattle seeming energized by the cooler air and fresh vegetation the rain had awakened. As they rode, Quinn pointed out landmarks and shared stories of previous drives along this route. Zara found herself laughing at his tales of misadventures and near disasters, each story revealing more about the man himself, his resourcefulness, his sense of humor, his deep attachment to the land they traveled through. "My father used to say a man could read the land like a book if he paid proper attention," Quinn told her as they paused atop a rise, the herd spread out below them. "The way the grass grows, the paths animals make, the shape of the clouds, it all tells you something if you know how to listen." "And what is it telling you today?" Zara asked, curious. Quinn scanned the horizon, his expression thoughtful. "That we're in for good weather, at least for the next day or so, that there's water ahead even though we can't see it yet, and that we're being watched." Zara stiffened, alarmed. "Watched? By whom?" Quinn nodded toward a distant ridge. "See that dust? Riders keeping pace with us but staying just out of clear sight. Been there since mid-morning." "Indians?" Zara asked, her pulse quickening. "Maybe, or could be bandits, or just travelers taking the same route." Despite his calm tone, Zara noticed that his hand rested casually near his holstered revolver. "Elias and Jeremiah have spotted them too. We'll keep moving, stay alert." They continued their journey, the knowledge of unseen watchers casting a shadow over the day's progress. By late afternoon, however, the dust on the horizon had disappeared, and Quinn's shoulders relaxed somewhat. "Whoever they were, they've moved on," he told Zara as they prepared to make camp for the night. "Still, we'll post watches tonight just to be safe." That evening, after supper, Zara found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The temporary tent they'd erected for her felt confining, and her mind kept returning to the mysterious riders Quinn had spotted. After tossing and turning for what felt like hours, she finally gave up and slipped outside. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. Jeremiah was on watch, sitting by the small fire they'd maintained. He nodded to her as she approached. "Everything all right, Mrs. Lawson?" "Yes, just having trouble sleeping," she replied, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "Mind if I join you for a bit?" "Not at all." He pushed the coffee pot toward her. "Still warm if you'd like some." Zara helped herself to a cup, then settled on a log across from him. "Have you worked for Quinn long?" "Going on 3 years now," Jeremiah replied, feeding a small stick into the fire. "Best boss I've had. Fair pay, treats his men like people instead of hired hands." And before that, Jeremiah's expression clouded slightly. "Bit of this, bit of that. Rode with a rough crowd for a while after the war. Made some choices I'm not proud of." He glanced at her, as if gauging her reaction. "Quinn gave me a chance when most wouldn't. Man sees the good in folks, even when they can't see it in themselves." Zara nodded, thinking of how Quinn had offered her help without hesitation, despite knowing nothing about her beyond her immediate need. "He seems like a good man." "One of the best," Jeremiah agreed. He studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Don't mean to speak out of turn, madam, but he thinks highly of you." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Jeremiah said with a shrug. "My ma used to say some folks recognize each other's souls right off, like they've met before in another life." Before Zara could respond, movement from one of the bedrolls caught her attention. Quinn sat up, instantly alert, his hand going to the revolver beside him. When he spotted Zara by the fire, he relaxed, running a hand through his sleep-tousled hair. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice husky with sleep. "Yes, boss," Jeremiah assured him. "Mrs. Lawson was just keeping me company." Quinn nodded, reaching for his boots. "I'll take over the watch." "Get some sleep, Jeremiah." "Still got an hour on my shift," Jeremiah protested. "I'm awake now anyway," Quinn said, joining them by the fire. "Go on." After Jeremiah had retreated to his bedroll, Quinn poured himself a cup of coffee and settled onto the log beside Zara. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. "My mind wouldn't quiet," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." Quinn nodded, understanding. "Trail can do that, give you too much time to think." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly before them. Zara found herself studying Quinn's profile in the flickering light, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks when he looked down. "Tell me about your ranch," she said suddenly, curious about the life he led when not on the trail. A smile touched his lips. "Not much to tell. Small place about 30 miles outside Amarillo. 160 acres, most of it decent grazing land. House needs work. It was there when I bought the place, built by the previous owner. Good solid barn, though. Creek running through the property year-round, which is worth its weight in gold out here." "It sounds lovely," Zara said, trying to picture it. "It could be," Quinn acknowledged. "Needs a woman's touch, truth be told. I'm gone too much to make it proper homey." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Zara felt her heart beat faster and she looked away, suddenly shy. "What about you?" Quinn asked gently. "Did you like being married, having a home?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she said after a moment. "Very much. Thomas and I, we were happy. It wasn't always easy. We struggled financially at times, but we faced everything together." She twisted her wedding ring absently. "I miss that partnership more than anything, I think. Knowing someone was there, that I wasn't facing the world alone." Quinn's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of understanding that was gone almost as quickly as it came. "I can understand that," he said quietly. They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Zara stood, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "I should try to sleep," she said. "Thank you for the company." "Anytime," Quinn replied, his eyes warm in the firelight. "Good night, Zara." "Good night, Quinn." As she returned to her tent, Zara's mind was filled with thoughts of Quinn Zimmer, his kindness, his strength, the way his hand had felt covering hers. It had been so long since she'd felt this flutter of interest in another person. Was it disloyal to Thomas's memory? Or was it, perhaps, a sign that she was finally healing? She fell asleep with these questions still circling in her mind, and dreamed of wide open spaces and a ranch house with a creek running nearby. The next few days brought them closer to Santa Fe, the landscape gradually changing as they gained elevation. The nights grew cooler, the days clearer, and Zara found herself both anticipating and dreading their arrival at their destination. What awaited her in Santa Fe? And more importantly, What would happen between her and Quinn when they reached the end of their journey together? They had grown closer, with each passing day sharing stories of their childhoods over morning coffee, riding side by side as the herd moved steadily northward, exchanging glances across the campfire that lingered longer each evening. Yet neither had spoken openly about the growing attraction between them. As if by mutual agreement, they were waiting for something, though Zara wasn't sure what. On their 8th day of travel, they encountered a small band of Apache hunters. Quinn spoke to them in halting but serviceable Spanish, which seemed to be a language they shared. After a brief conversation and the exchange of tobacco, the Apache continued on their way. "What did they say?" Zara asked as they watched the hunters ride away. "They warned us about bandits in the area," Quinn replied, his expression serious. "Said there's been several attacks on travelers in the past week, a group of about 6 men, well armed and desperate. The same ones who robbed my stagecoach, could be. The description matches." Quinn signaled to Elias and Jeremiah. "We'll need to be extra vigilant. No unnecessary stops, and we'll double the watch at night." That evening, as they made camp in a defensible position with good visibility in all directions, there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Zara noticed that all 3 men kept their weapons close at hand, and conversation over supper was subdued. After the meal, Quinn took her aside, his expression grave. "If there's trouble," he said quietly, "I want you to take Penny and ride for the hills to the east. There's a small settlement about 10 miles from here. You'd reach it by morning if you keep the North Star to your left." Alarm flared in Zara's chest. "You think there will be?" "I think it pays to be prepared," Quinn replied, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "Promise me you'll do as I say if something happens." Zara wanted to protest, to insist she wouldn't leave him and the others to face danger alone, but the intensity in his eyes stopped her. "I promise," she said finally. Quinn's relief was visible. "Good. Hopefully it won't come to that." That night, Zara slept fitfully, starting awake at every small sound. She was just drifting off again when a hand clamped over her mouth, startling her fully awake. Quinn's face was inches from hers, his finger pressed to his lips in a gesture for silence. When she nodded understanding, he removed his hand. "Riders approaching," he whispered, barely audible. "At least 5 of them, coming in quiet. Get dressed quickly and be ready to run for Penny if I give the signal." Heart pounding, Zara reached for her dress as Quinn slipped out of the tent. She dressed with trembling fingers, straining to hear any sounds of the approaching threat. The camp was eerily silent. Elias and Jeremiah must also be awake and alert. She had just pulled on her boots when the first shot rang out, followed immediately by several more. Shouting erupted outside, along with the panicked lowing of cattle. Zara froze for a moment, terror paralyzing her limbs before Quinn's instructions echoed in her mind. She had to be ready to run. Gathering her courage, she crawled to the tent opening and peered out cautiously. In the dim moonlight, she could make out shadowy figures engaged in a firefight. The raiders had approached on foot, using the darkness for cover, but Quinn and his men had been prepared. 3 bodies already lay motionless on the ground, but more attackers were firing from behind rocks and scrub brush. Zara spotted Quinn crouched behind their wagon, exchanging fire with an unseen assailant. As she watched, he glanced in her direction, his eyes widening when he saw her. He gestured urgently toward the horses, which were tethered on the far side of the camp. Understanding his signal, Zara took a deep breath and darted from the tent, keeping low as she ran toward the horses. A bullet whizzed past her head, close enough that she felt the displacement of air. Someone shouted one of the attackers had spotted her. She reached Penny and fumbled with the tether, her fingers clumsy with fear. Behind her, the gunfire intensified. Finally freeing the horse, she grabbed the saddle horn and was about to mount when she heard Quinn cry out in pain. Turning, she saw him stagger backward, one hand pressed to his side. Even in the dim light, she could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. Fear, unlike anything she'd ever known, surged through her. Without thinking, she abandoned Penny and ran toward him. "Quinn!" she cried, reaching his side as he slumped against the wagon wheel. "Zara," he gasped, his face contorted with pain. "You need to go, now." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely, helping him to his feet. "Can you walk?" Before he could answer, Elias appeared beside them, his face grim. "They're falling back," he reported. "Jeremiah's hit, but not bad. We need to move before they regroup." Together, they half-carried Quinn to the horses. Jeremiah was already there, a bandana tied around his upper arm, blood seeping through the fabric. Working quickly, they secured Quinn in his saddle, then mounted their own horses. "The cattle," Quinn protested weakly. "Let him go," Elias said firmly. "Ain't worth dying for." With Elias leading the way, they rode hard into the night, leaving behind the camp, the scattered herd, and the bodies of the raiders who had fallen in the attack. Zara stayed close to Quinn, watching him anxiously. He was slumped forward in the saddle, one hand still pressed to his wounded side. But he remained conscious, guiding his horse with his free hand. They rode for what felt like hours, following a narrow trail that wound through increasingly hilly terrain. Just before dawn, they reached the settlement. Quinn had mentioned a small cluster of buildings surrounding a church. Elias rode ahead to rouse help, while Zara and Jeremiah helped Quinn dismount. "You're going to be all right," Zara told him, supporting his weight as they made their way toward the nearest building. "We'll find a doctor." Quinn managed a weak smile. "Didn't expect our journey to end like this," he murmured, his voice strained with pain. "It's not ending," Zara said firmly. "Not like this. Not now." The settlement, as it turned out, was a mission outpost with a small infirmary. The resident priest, Father Martinez, had some medical training and immediately set about examining Quinn's wound. "The bullet passed through cleanly," he told Zara after his examination. "No vital organs appear to be damaged, but he's lost a lot of blood. He needs rest and careful tending to prevent infection." Relief washed over Zara. "I'll tend to him," she said without hesitation. While Father Martinez treated Jeremiah's less serious wound, Zara sat beside Quinn's cot, gently bathing his face with cool water. His skin was hot to the touch, and she feared fever might be setting in already. "You should have run," he said weakly, his eyes finding hers. "I told you to run." "I couldn't leave you," Zara replied simply. Quinn's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakened state. "Why?" The question hung between them, demanding an answer that Zara had been avoiding for days. She looked down at their joined hands, then back at his face, seeing the same question in his eyes that had been in his voice. "Because," she began, then faltered. How could she explain feelings she barely understood herself? "Because you've become important to me, Quinn. More important than I expected, more important than I was ready for." A smile touched his lips. "That works out well then," he murmured, his voice fading as exhaustion overtook him. "Because you've become important to me too, Zara Lawson, more important than anything." His eyes drifted closed, but his hand remained wrapped around hers, a lifeline connecting them as he slipped into sleep. For 3 days, Quinn's fever burned hot, his body fighting off infection as Zara tended to him tirelessly. She bathed his brow, changed his bandages, and spooned broth between his cracked lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. Elias and Jeremiah took turns sitting with him as well, but it was Zara who rarely left his side, dozing in the chair beside his cot when exhaustion claimed her. On the fourth day, his fever finally broke. Zara awoke from a brief nap to find him watching her, his eyes clear and alert for the first time since they'd arrived at the mission. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough but stronger than it had been. "Of course I am," Zara replied, reaching for the water cup beside his bed. "Where else would I be?" Quinn accepted the water gratefully, drinking slowly. When he finished, he studied her face. "You look exhausted," he observed. "Have you been taking care of yourself at all?" A small laugh escaped her. "You're the one who was shot and you're worried about me, always," he said simply. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Zara felt her heart quicken as she met his gaze. "Quinn," she began, but was interrupted by the arrival of Father Martinez. "Ah, you're awake," the priest exclaimed, moving to examine Quinn's wound. "And the fever has broken. God is merciful." He checked the bandages and nodded with satisfaction. "The wound is healing cleanly. You are a fortunate man, Mr. Zimmer." "I know," Quinn replied, his eyes never leaving Zara's face. As Quinn's strength returned over the next few days, they began to discuss their next steps. The cattle herd was lost scattered by the attack and likely rounded up by the very bandits who had tried to kill them. Quinn had lost not only the cattle but also most of his supplies and equipment. "It's a significant setback," he admitted as they sat together outside the mission, enjoying the cool evening air. "But I've faced worse. I still have my ranch in Amarillo. I can start over." "What about your buyer in Santa Fe?" Zara asked. "Won't he be expecting the cattle?" Quinn shook his head. "Elias rode to Santa Fe yesterday to explain what happened. The buyer's disappointed but understands the circumstances." He glanced at her. "And what about you?" "We're only about a day's ride from Santa Fe now. Do you still plan to find your husband's cousin?" Zara looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she still wore. Over the past 2 weeks, Thomas had begun to feel more like a cherished memory than an open wound. She would always love him, always honor what they had shared, but life continued. "I think I should," she said slowly. "At least to let him know what happened to Thomas, but after that." She hesitated, uncertain how to express the new direction her thoughts had taken. Quinn waited patiently, giving her the space to find her words. "After that, I'm not sure," Zara finally continued. "Santa Fe is as good a place as any to start over, I suppose. Or, Quinn prompted gently when she didn't continue. Zara gathered her courage. "Or perhaps there might be somewhere else. Somewhere with a creek running through it and a house that needs a woman's touch." Quinn's breath caught audibly. "Zara," he said, his voice low and intense, "are you saying what I think you're saying?" She met his gaze directly. "I'm saying that these past 2 weeks have changed me. I'm saying that when I thought you might die, I realized how much you've come to mean to me." She twisted her wedding ring absently. "I'm saying that perhaps we could explore what's growing between us, if you're interested in doing so." Quinn's face broke into a smile that lit his entire countenance. "Interested doesn't begin to cover it," he said, reaching for her hand. "From the moment you tried to trade your wedding ring for bread, something inside me recognized you, Zara, like I'd been waiting for you without even knowing it." "It seems ridiculous," Zara admitted. "We've known each other such a short time." "Time isn't always the best measure of such things," Quinn said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "My parents knew after 3 days that they wanted to spend their lives together. They had 30 good years before my mother passed." Zara felt a flutter of hope and possibility. "So what do we do now? First, I need to heal completely," Quinn said practically. "Then we go to Santa Fe as planned. You find your husband's cousin, tie up that loose end. After that." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "After that, if you're still of the same mind, I'd be honored to have you visit my ranch in Amarillo. See if it might be a place you could call home someday." "I'd like that," Zara said, a warm glow spreading through her at the thought. Quinn lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "So would I, Zara Lawson. So would I." 2 weeks later, fully recovered and with new horses and supplies purchased in Santa Fe, Quinn and Zara prepared for the journey to Amarillo. Elias and Jeremiah had chosen to remain in Santa Fe, finding work with a local rancher, but promised to rejoin Quinn once he was established again. Zara had located Thomas's cousin, John Lawson, who had been shocked and saddened to learn of Thomas's death. He had offered Zara a place in his household, but had understood when she explained her new plans. Before they parted, he had given her a small sum of money that he insisted had been meant for Thomas anyway, enough to give her a sense of independence as she embarked on this new chapter of her life. As they set out from Santa Fe, riding side by side beneath a clear blue sky, Zara felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in over a year. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise. She glanced at Quinn, noting the way the sunlight caught in his hair, the easy confidence with which he sat his horse, the warmth in his eyes when he turned to meet her gaze. "Ready for a new adventure?" he asked with a smile that made her heart skip. Zara nodded, returning his smile with one of her own. "More than ready," she replied, and urged Penny forward into whatever lay ahead. The journey to Amarillo took just over a week, with Quinn and Zara traveling at a leisurely pace, stopping when and where they pleased. Without the cattle to drive or a strict timeline to follow, they were free to enjoy the journey itself, the changing landscapes, the small settlements they passed through, and most importantly, each other's company. They talked endlessly, learning the contours of each other's lives, dreams, and fears. Zara shared memories of Thomas that had once been too painful to recall, but now brought a bittersweet comfort. Quinn spoke of his parents, of growing up on a ranch not unlike the one he now owned, of his hopes to build something lasting. In the evenings, as they sat by their campfire under the vast, star-studded sky, their conversations grew deeper, more intimate. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Quinn's arm around Zara's shoulders, her head resting against him as they watched the flames dance. It was during one such evening, 3 days from Amarillo, that Quinn first kissed her. They had been discussing the constellations visible above them, Quinn pointing out patterns his father had taught him as a boy. When Zara turned to ask a question, she found his face inches from hers, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Time seemed to suspend as they looked at each other. Then, with a gentleness that made her heart ache, Quinn cradled her face in his hands and brought his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, a question more than a demand, but when Zara responded, sliding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more urgent, more profound. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for quite some time," he murmured. "What took you so long?" Zara asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Quinn laughed softly, the sound warming her more than the fire. "Respect, patience, fear that I might be misreading the signals." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't want to rush you, Zara." "I appreciate that," she said sincerely, "but I'm not as fragile as you might think." "I never thought you were fragile," Quinn replied, his eyes serious now. "I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. To have endured what you have and still have so much warmth, so much capacity for joy." He shook his head slightly in wonder. "It amazes me." Zara kissed him again, unable to find words adequate to express what his understanding meant to her. When they separated, Quinn took her hand in his expression solemn. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice low and earnest. I know this has all happened quickly, and I don't want to pressure you in any way. When we reach Amarillo, you're welcome to stay as my guest for as long as you like, with no expectations or obligations. If, after seeing the place and spending more time together, you decide it's not what you want, I'll understand completely. Touched by his consideration, Zara squeezed his hand. Thank you, Quinn, but I already know my own mind in this. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't certain of my feelings for you. Relief and joy spread across Quinn's face. And what feelings might those be, Zara Lawson? She smiled, suddenly shy despite her certainty. I believe I'm falling in love with you, Quinn Zimmer. Actually, I think I might already have fallen. Quinn's arms tightened around her. Then we're in the same predicament, he whispered against her hair, because I'm quite certain I'm already in love with you. They reached Quinn's ranch on a crisp autumn afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. Zara felt a flutter of nerves as they crested a small hill and the property came into view below them. A modest house stood in a natural clearing, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. A creek wound its way through the property, just as Quinn had described, bordered by cottonwoods that were turning golden with the season. It's not much, Quinn said, a note of uncertainty in his voice as he watched her reaction. Like I said, the house needs work. But to Zara, who had spent the past year without a home to call her own, it looked perfect, a place of possibility, of new beginnings. It's lovely, she said sincerely. Relief washed over Quinn's face. Really? You're not just saying that, really, she assured him with a smile. Now, are you going to show me around, or are we going to sit here admiring it from a distance all day? Quinn laughed, the sound rich and warm in the quiet landscape. Yes, madam, he said, tipping his hat playfully before leading the way down the hill. The house was simple but solidly built, with 4 rooms downstairs and 2 small bedrooms upstairs under the eaves. It was sparsely furnished, and as Quinn had warned, in need of some attention. The floors were scuffed, the walls bare, the kitchen functional but uninviting. Yet Zara could see the potential in every corner, could imagine what it might become with care and time. What do you think, honestly? Quinn asked as they stood in the main room after the tour. Zara turned to him, her heart full. I think it has good bones, she said. I think it could be a wonderful home. She hesitated, then added softly, our home if you want that too. Quinn's expression grew serious. He took both her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. Zara Lawson, nothing would make me happier than to make this our home together. But I want to do things properly. To her surprise, he dropped to one knee before her. I know we haven't known each other long, but I love you more than I thought possible. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears welled in Zara's eyes as joy bubbled up inside her. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Quinn Zimmer, I will marry you. Quinn rose and gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. When he set her down, his expression grew tender as he reached into his pocket. I have something for you, he said, producing a small silver ring with a modest turquoise stone. I bought this in Santa Fe. It's not fancy, but it's perfect, Zara interrupted, extending her left hand. Quinn paused, his gaze falling to her other hand where Thomas's wedding band still rested. Understanding what he was thinking, Zara gently removed the gold ring, looking at it one last time before carefully placing it in her pocket. I'll always cherish what Thomas and I shared, she said quietly, but that chapter of my life is complete now. You are my future, Quinn. You and whatever we build together. Quinn's eyes shone with emotion as he slipped the silver ring onto her finger. I promise to do everything in my power to make you happy, Zara, to build a life with you that's full of joy and love. We'll build it together, she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Amarillo, with Elias and Jeremiah, who had traveled from Santa Fe for the occasion, serving as witnesses. Zara wore a new dress of deep blue that Quinn had insisted on buying for her, and carried wildflowers gathered from the meadow near their home. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the small church filled with afternoon sunlight as they spoke their vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, tears not of sadness for what she had lost, but of gratitude for the unexpected gift of a second chance at love. The following spring found the ranch transformed. Under Zara's careful attention, the house had become a true home: curtains at the windows, colorful quilts on the beds, and the scent of home-cooked meals filling the rooms. Quinn had built new furniture for their bedroom and the main living area, his carpentry skills improving with each project. Outside, the land was coming to life as well. Quinn had expanded the corral and built a proper chicken coop. A small vegetable garden flourished behind the house, and they had planted fruit trees that would bear in the years to come. With the profit from a successful cattle sale, his first since rebuilding his herd, Quinn had purchased adjoining land, doubling the size of their ranch. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, Quinn wrapped his arm around Zara's shoulders, drawing her close against his side. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Very," Zara replied, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly where their first child was growing. They had discovered the pregnancy just after the new year, and the baby was due in late summer. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Quinn said, his voice rich with contentment. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd find you, that we'd be building this life together, I wouldn't have believed them. And to think it all started because I tried to trade my wedding ring for bread," Zara mused, still amazed at the twists and turns that had brought them together. Quinn chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. "Best business decision I ever made, buying you dinner that night." "And asking for my story," Zara added. "I think I knew even then," Quinn admitted, his voice growing soft with memory. "Something about you called to me from the first moment I saw you." Zara smiled, turning to face him. "I'm glad you listened to that call." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Quinn Zimmer kissed his wife with all the love in his heart, grateful beyond measure for the journey that had brought them home. Years passed, and the Zimmer ranch flourished, as did the family that called it home. Zara gave birth to a healthy son they named Samuel Thomas in late August, his arrival bringing joy beyond measure to the young couple. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth Rose, named for Quinn's mother. Quinn expanded the ranch operations, developing a reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock. He no longer needed to drive cattle to distant markets. Buyers came to him, willing to pay premium prices for his well-bred stock. Elias eventually joined them permanently as ranch foreman, becoming like a grandfather to the children, who adored his stories and harmonica playing. Zara found her place in the community as well, teaching at the local school once the children were old enough, and later helping to establish Amarillo's first proper library. She kept Thomas's wedding ring in a small box with his daguerreotype, occasionally showing it to the children as she told them about her first husband and the lessons she had learned about love and loss. When Samuel was 10 and Elizabeth 8, the family welcomed another son, James Quinn, a precocious child with his mother's dark hair and his father's amber eyes. By then, the original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with wide porches where they gathered on summer evenings to watch the sunset. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Zara with a special gift, a small gold locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children. As he fastened it around her neck, his hand still strong but now bearing the marks of years of honest labor, he whispered, "Thank you for our life together." Zara turned in his arms, studying the face she had come to know better than her own, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper now, strands of silver threading through his chestnut hair, but those same amber eyes still looking at her with unwavering love. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked. "If you hadn't been in that bakery on that particular day," Quinn smiled, pulling her closer. "Sometimes. But then I remember what my father used to say, that some things are written in the stars long before we understand them." "Like us," Zara suggested, returning his smile. "Exactly like us," Quinn agreed, kissing her softly. "Besides, I have a confession to make." Zara raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I wasn't in that bakery by accident," Quinn admitted. "I saw you earlier that day, looking lost and alone on the street. Something about you caught my attention, made me want to help somehow. I followed you, not in a menacing way," he hastened to add. "Just. I was worried about you." Surprise widened Zara's eyes. "You never told me that." "I was afraid you might think it strange," Quinn said with a sheepish smile. "But now, after 15 years, I figure you're stuck with me regardless." Zara laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been when they first fell in love. "Definitely stuck with you, Quinn Zimmer," she assured him, leaning up to kiss him again. "And grateful for it every single day." Later that evening, as they sat on the porch with their children, watching the stars come out one by one in the vast Texas sky, Zara thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment, the grief she had endured, the courage it had taken to start anew, and the unexpected blessing of finding love when she least expected it. The wedding ring she had once been willing to trade for bread had long since been put away, a treasured relic of her first love. On her finger now was the silver and turquoise ring Quinn had placed there on the day they became engaged, supplemented by a simple gold band from their wedding day. They were symbols not just of her marriage to Quinn, but of the resilience of the human heart, its capacity to heal, to hope, and to love again. As her family laughed around her, Quinn's arm warm and secure around her shoulders, Zara Zimmer knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in the love they had built together, a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a desperate day in Fort Sumner. And in the end, wasn't that the greatest blessing of all?